El desarrollo de este proyecto me sigue apasionando porque es una alternativa viable y sustentable para que todos en nuestro país podamos tener alimentos saludables y en abundancia para que no falten en nuestras mesas. Los sistemas biotecnológicos de recirculación de agua son una propuesta de investigación y desarrollo tecnológico para generar alimentos a través del uso sustentable del manejo del agua. La innovación abarca crear proyectos hidropónicos y acuícolas junto con el cultivo de bacterias para poder cultivar peces y hortalizas en sistemas cerrados bajo invernadero, que se pueden instalar tanto en zonas rurales, semirurales y urbanas. Hemos podido unir esfuerzos tanto el Tecnológico de Monterrey, la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana de Xochimilco y empresas de nuestro país para el desarrollo de esta tecnología y poderla llevar a los hogares y poblaciones de nuestro país.
La forma en que se vinculó el Tecnológico de Monterrey con la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Unidad Xochimilco fue por el medio del interés del manejo integral del agua y los sistemas de recirculación. Es una satisfacción saber que hay otros investigadores que estamos interesados en este tipo de problemáticas nacionales.
Para el municipio de Lerma, Estado de México, es muy importante el desarrollar este tipo de proyectos, ya que provee a las poblaciones de alta marginalidad una proteína de alta calidad y hortalizas durante todo el año, no importando la época en que se encuentren.
Yo como productor de acuaponía tengo los beneficios de poder tener lo que es trucha y gracias a eso tener también hortalizas de bajo porte. Esta tecnología me beneficia porque puedo producir productos orgánicos de alta calidad a precios muy bajos. Gracias a esto se benefician familias de escasos recursos o que quieren tener un ingreso adicional. ¿Por qué? Porque vendemos productos a bajos precios que ellos también pueden vender en el mercado.
Sí, pues me vienen a buscar, si hay lechuga, sapio. Luego me da gusto pues para vender el producto que hay. Pues de aquí come mi familia.
Trabajar con colegas en un proyecto de investigación que no solamente se va a quedar en papel es muy inspirador. El proyecto va a tener impactos en cuanto a ambiente, en cuanto a la sociedad y en cuanto a económico. Estoy convencido que este proyecto va a ayudar a mucha gente.
Me gustaría tener más invernaderos para salir adelante.
Investigación que transforma vidas.
Well, good morning, everyone who is listening and watching at the moment, and also good evening. And for some of us, even good night, as Josh here is in the middle of the night in Australia. Welcome to the Urban Dialogue. Today we will talk about food, as you have seen. Although it would be better to talk about heat today, because in Monterey, where we are at the moment, it's getting to 44 degrees. So bear with us that all the systems continue to work. No energy blackouts or anything. So we will have a good session today. My name is Rob Rogema. I'm a professor of regenerative culture at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Monterrey, and we are doing these urban dialogues on different themes once every month. By the way, the theme of heat and drought we will do in August. So if you continue to stay with us in August, we will talk about heat and how we can deal with that in the city. So we talk about the food system today, and that is very important because the food system is discussed all over the place, all over the globe, because it's not going very well with the food system. It produces unhealthy food. Most of it is processed. This is impacting our soil, our water and air quality. And it is also not very equal system. it infects and it is not feeding the poor very well. Moreover, it's causing diseases like we have seen last year and the years before COVID, but also it impacts people's health in diabetes and obesity. Mostly of the consequence of this system is that farmers are the victims of the system because large multinationals take over and the small farmers don't earn an honest salary. And finally, the farmland is kind of exhausted and is driven by monofunctionality. So it doesn't look any good anymore. So the main question for today is, can we actually grow healthy food, more healthy food in urban environments so that we can use that food to feed our urban population and at the same time increase their health? How can we plan for this? How can we transform and change the city? So that is the main question for today. If you have any questions during the session or just right after, you can put your questions in the chat. We can see them immediately and we can direct the question to one of the speakers or all of them. So please feel free to open your chat box and start typing. In the meantime, we will listen to 4 fantastic speakers that we have with us today. We start with Joshua Zunert. He is staying with us for only, let's say, 20 minutes because I think it's 1 a.m. in the night in Sydney at the moment where he's from. So fantastic that you are here at this late time, Josh, and great to see you again on the screen. He is a landscape architect and he is focusing on resilient landscapes and cities and focused much on food systems in urban environments. We met I think for the first time, it was in the Netherlands in a food conference, and we had a great time already. And since then, he published fantastic books. So if you are interested in this topic, just Google him and see a couple of the books that he wrote. They not only fantastic books, but they look also very nice. So I think that's also important. Welcome, Josh. If you want to share your screen and start your talk, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Rob said, it is very late here and I'm suffering with a flu. So I'll see how I go, but I do apologize if I'm not quite as sharp as usual. But Rob, can you see the screen there okay?
Absolutely, yeah, all good.
Excellent. Okay, let's dive in. So as Rob mentioned, we're talking about urban food production, and Rob wanted me to start by setting the scene a little bit, which works quite nicely, I think. And this was Rob's brief for today's session. The last dot point there, Rob wanted me to focus on that, a framework for urban agriculture. And based on some recent research I've been doing, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm going to expand it a little bit more into a bit of a wider context for urban agriculture. Particularly, I'm going to show you a bunch of scale comparisons of sort of globalized industrial food systems and compare their spatial scale to urban contexts, again, to sort of calibrate what urban food systems are potentially competing against. And then very briefly, what factors I think should change to increase the viability of urban agriculture. Now, as Rob said, I'm speaking from an Australian context at the moment, and so every country has completely unique histories, cultural conditions, governance systems, economic systems to a degree. But Australia's food system, Australia was colonized by the British in 1788, and since that point, effectively, it's been a sort of cash crop, commodity-based system, large scale, and more recently we sort of classified, I guess, as neoliberal agribusiness. So there's never really been an agrarian or a yeoman or a sort of peasant culture, agriculture in Australia. So just keep that in mind, I guess, when I'm talking about a lot of the things I'm talking about today. But let's start with what are urban agriculture's conceptual dimensions. So thanks for the shout out, Rob. There's a book I edited with a colleague from the UK, Tim Waterman, And there was a chapter in that I wrote called Dimensions of Urban Agriculture, where I effectively just put forward a conceptual framework. And, I don't know whether it's any good or not, we can decide. But I guess the point of it is that multiple dimensions or considerations of urban agriculture need to be considered concurrently. And, when I did an extensive literature review for this chapter, the social dimensions of urban agriculture certainly tend to be biased. And so when I put some key literature, this was pre-2017, into this sort of discourse spectrum, this is the way it mapped out. And you can see some gaps there around the economic, a little bit less around the spatial. And I mean, it's not exhaustive. It was just a attempt at it. But another framework, I was reviewing a journal paper. I don't know whether this is kosher or not, but it's a forthcoming journal paper. And so this is a framework for urban agriculture that they proposed, but it expands into a much, much more detailed framework. You can see there on the left, which is broken into all these complex diagrams. There's a zoom in on one of them. So, mine was a very basic conceptual one, again, thinking about multiple things concurrently. This is a much more detailed practical guide. And look, there's many other frameworks out there, but today I want to focus on the spatial and the economic, as mentioned, because I feel they are a little bit still underdone in relation to urban food systems, and particularly the failures behind a lot of urban agriculture, a failure to, I think, appreciate the economic and spatial dimensions amongst others. So, what is urban agriculture competing with? Well, it's competing with rural and regional agriculture, certainly in the Australian context, massive scale regional rural production. And then there's peri-urban commercial agriculture, often on the city fringe. If cities expand, it often gets pushed further and further out. But again, the scale of it can be quite intensive. But then we've got the urban agriculture we all here love, I imagine. And as I mentioned, we tend to, I don't want to overgeneralize here, but we tend to focus on the public and the social dimensions of that. So national agricultural philosophy and policy is a significant determinant of the economic viability of urban agriculture. So in Australia, I'll term that competitive productivism. And in more basic terms, that really equates to get big or get out. And so that philosophy, that policy places economic strain on smaller producers. So let's jump into some scale comparisons. So what we have on the left is the total area of the European Union, and what we have on the right is pretty much the same exact area in Australia that's just grazed by livestock, by cattle and sheep predominantly. And then when we look at Australia, the orange colour is the amount of land devoted to agriculture, way more than any other land use. You can see the bright red. Urban areas only constitute less than half a percent of Australia's total land use. So it's very much large scale, to the point where we have the world's largest cattle station or ranch. Here it is here. It's a bit over half the size of the entire area of the Netherlands. And it's so arid that it only runs 1,500 to 16,500 cattle, depending on climatic conditions. That same station is actually bigger than the entire country of Israel. And, this isn't that exact station, but this is the kind of environment we're talking about. Now, this is one of the world's biggest cotton farms on the left. And again, we're not going to grow cotton in an urban environment, but it's still giving us a sense of the scale of regional production here, where, it's over 2.5 times the size of the city of Philadelphia in the United States. On the left, we see one property holding of Australia's largest olive oil producer. And on the right, we see one of the world's largest parkland systems in Sydney. And although that olive oil property is smaller than the parkland systems, this is just a very small microcosm. In the top right, you can see a little red arrow there. So that's just the scale of these regional production landscapes is just immense. This is Australia's largest free-range chicken farm on the left. And on the right, we have the suburb where intensive poultry farming began in the mid-20th century. in Sydney. And so that one farm is larger than a suburb on the right, which is, I think, don't quote me on it, but home to about 240,000 people, give or take. There's one of the little clusters. So this is a free range chicken farm. Each shed can hold over 40,000 birds, and there's 7 of these clusters. This is the Southern Hemisphere's largest piggery. And so Rob mentioned Melbourne before. If you cast your mind back, Rob, St Kilda on the coast, on the top right image. If you travel north across the city, past Melbourne University, up to the zoo, that's the equivalent size to this one piggery here. And in the bottom left, you'll see this sort of intense production area of it, and it's larger than this park here, Albert Park, which is home to the Australian Grand Prix. So that sort of gives you a sense of the size. There's a shot of an area of that piggery. Top left, we have Australia's largest cattle feedlot, and you can see in the top right, it's larger than Brisbane, the 3rd largest city in Australia, the airport there. The actual pens housing the cattle on the bottom left is bigger than the local regional airport there. That's not this feedlot. This one's actually a lot smaller. You can't actually get close enough to it to get any footage of it, but it gives you a sense of the sort of environment. Now, this is a bit more relevant to urban agriculture. What we have on the left is one of Australia's larger leafy greens and herb farms. Don't take that red boundary area as exact. We need to double check it with the company, but it still gives you a sense. So this company has got multiple properties across Australia producing leafy greens and herbs, and this is their largest one. And you can see there, it's significantly larger than Central Park in New York City, which is one of the larger public open spaces in the world. That's a shot from one of their smaller leafy green farms, just to give you some sense of the scale. And then on the left here, we have one of Australia's intensive greenhouse production farms of tomatoes. Again, probably a bit more relevant to urban agriculture. And then on the right, we have one of Western Europe's largest allotments, very similar in size. And the tomato farm on the left produces quite a significant proportion of tomatoes for one of the 2 major supermarket chains in Australia. And that's an aerial shot of it there. It's got a solar thermal farm as part of it, and a seawater desalination plant as part of it as well. So does urban agriculture have to economically compete in the agricultural free market against, farms of this immense scale that we're seeing here to be viable? And the additional complexity in urban agriculture, it's often spatially constrained, it's socially contested, and it's just a complex context for practicing agriculture, especially when we're in the public realm as opposed to private lands. So what's urban agriculture competing with for land and legitimacy? Well, in a sense, it's not always competing. Sometimes, we can say it's complementary, but often it is in competition. So this was just a quick list off the top of my head the last couple of days. But the point I wanted to make here is many of these land uses are respected and established as having value that is greater than the economic value that they return to the city. So let's take conservation area, for example. The value of conservation areas in most cities across the world is seen in a way, or not subject to quantification in the way that urban agriculture is, certainly in the cultural context I come from, and there's various other examples there. So why does urban agriculture and valuable urban agricultural and peri-urban agricultural lands not have a meta-economic value ascribed to it? So this is Sydney, where my university is based. This is sort of Greater Sydney. This is an area of 5,500 square kilometres. And Sydney was colonised or founded in 1788. And you can see this is mapping Sydney's urban food landscapes. This is a project I've been working on for about 5 years now. And It's a book that will hopefully be out next year. And then if we jump ahead to the next time period here, you can see sort of that outward spread of both all these different colored dots, which are different. I've called them typologies. There's 11 different typologies of urban agriculture that I've spent years and years mapping. And then this period here, you can see the urban footprint is expanding. There's quite a lot of urban agriculture, peri-urban agriculture, still closely attached to the urban form. But after World War II, although there's a lot of dots here, we see a lot of these disappear with the suburban expansion of the city post-World War II. And then you see this dramatic shift in the last 2 decades where urban agriculture is pushed, well outside of the city into the rural urban fringe. And, people have said that it's effectively entered a terminal spiral, a lot of this peri-urban agriculture, because the land value is so much compared to the amount of money, like Rob mentioned earlier, that people can make from, growing food in these sites, that it's just hobby farming and rural residential living and urban land development are taking over these lands, unfortunately. So what do we need to change to increase the viability of urban agriculture? Well, as I said, I think we really need to shift our values and just see the intrinsic value in urban food production, peri-urban food production, and valuable agricultural land. So that's kind of like a paradigm shift or a mental shift to recognize that value. And I mean, obviously it needs to be enshrined in planning, policy, and legislation for continued protection. I mean, certainly in the Sydney context and the Australian context, there's been sort of weak attempts to do that, but they've been very unsuccessful on the whole. I know in other countries around the world, there's been more success at that. As we're doing today, more advocacy, better policy to circumvent that get big or get out industrial scale agribusiness free market that I mentioned. And what about the inalienable right to access land to grow food? This notion of the commons, and activism for that, but that's a way too big a topic to get into today. So this is the second to last thing I wanted to show you. And what it is, I wanted to, well, for decades now, I've heard many people say urban areas aren't significant enough spatially, they're not large enough, we can't produce enough food in them. So what you're looking at here, this is Australia's national capital, Canberra, the Parliament House, Federal Parliament House on the hill here. And what we've done is we've taken Australia's combined area of intensive livestock production, which is about 12 square kilometres, and we've spatialised that across Canberra. So Canberra's a relatively small city, under 300,000 people from memory. Again, don't quote me on that. But you can see it's not a huge amount of a smaller city. So I think this kind of dispels the notion that urban areas aren't big enough to produce a lot of food. It's just that when we have these intensive livestock systems or other systems that would be considered completely inappropriate under the nose of, urban people living in the city, but when they're out of sight, out of mind, it's not the case. And then I'll just finish up now. I'll just fly through some specific works. Rob kindly mentioned, some work. So I've got some links here. This work was looking at the importance of aesthetics in public urban agriculture. This one was exploring the tension between ecology and specifically restoration ecology in urban contexts, and sort of teasing that out a little bit against food production. This is a book edited by Rob, and here's another book edited by Rob, where it's looking at how urban agriculture can be leveraged for social good in larger urban green spaces. There's the handbook that I showed you earlier. Here's a work that was exploring how urban expansion was getting into higher value productive land for agriculture, which is sort of a precursor to some work I'm doing at the moment. This is quite a brief chapter on more intensive production systems. I think we'll see a little bit more of today. This was a work assessing the 9 metropolitan strategies for Sydney in relation to agriculture. And the upshot was none of them were great. None of them have been great. And these 2 final works are, again, looking at aesthetics of urban agriculture and where we can draw inspiration from unique regional production landscapes. So, and then just a last plug for a website here that's not quite finished. It still should be fun to explore. Check that out if you can. And I just want to acknowledge 2 of my research assistants for helping me produce this work. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Josh. A great overview from large scale to zooming into cities and all the problems attached to it. I was amazed by seeing the shift of food production from connected to where people live, just pushing outward of the city of Sydney. So that is amazing to see that happening. And the big question, of course, here is how do we get it back into the city, given all the constraints that you have mentioned?
Yeah, it's a great question. Hopefully I covered up on it a little bit, but I think it just starts with us, with us valuing it, just respecting it as something that's so fundamentally important to our culture and civilization.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. Not only for food, by the way, but for culture, heritage, for many other things that are close to us and keeps us alive. Thank you so much, Josh. I'm not sure whether people already have questions for you, but I won't keep you out of bed any longer. So feel free to leave the session as when you want. And thanks again, and good to see you again. Keep in touch.
Thank you so much. Thanks all.
Thank you. We move from Australia. We go back to Mexico, and our next speaker is Alexandra Versteeg. I hope I pronounced your last name right. Not too bad, so I can see that. She is a professor in the School of Architecture, Arts and Design at Tecnológico de Monterrey, and working on several topics, but one of them is looking into nutritious landscapes, making the landscapes of Mexico more resilient and better for food production. And in that sense, she is my direct colleague in our school. So welcome, Alexandra, and I'm very curious to find out what you're going to present to us. If you want to share your screen, feel free to start.
Yes, thank you, Rob. And thanks to everybody who has joined us today. I will share my screen and talk a little bit about the research that I have been doing these last couple of years that I like to call nutritious landscapes. This research basically has the objectives to evaluate food environments in Mexico. There has been very little research about food environments in Mexico. It has 2 parts. In one side, it is traditional research where we review documents, statistical analysis, spatial analysis. And on the other side, we do a lot of field work because, as you know, in cities in Latin America, there is a high grade of informality and data is missing in these places. So no data, people become invisible, their problems become invisible. And I think it's very important also to go on the field and double check all the necessary indicators. And the third part is what we like to call here research by design, meaning that we are designing master plans for some abandoned or underutilized public spaces to transform them in urban gardens for the communities. And through the master planning itself, we research all the problems that possibly can come up as a type of investigation, of all the possible indicators. So of course, the objective of this research is to make better food environments and with that nutritional health. So this photo that I came about yesterday, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, is a little bit joking, but what it likes to say is that most of people in Mexico currently live in food swamps, what we call food swamps. You are, I think, all familiar with the term food deserts, where food is not available in a walkable proximity to your house. But I think in Mexico, for most urban residents, the food per se is not missing. It's just the type of food that is readily available close to your house, which is highly processed food and sugary drinks. Especially after the signing of the NAFTA agreement, this free trade agreement with the United States, there was an upsurge in these convenience stores that are literally everywhere in all, even the smallest urbanized zones. And of course, the third category will be urban oases, that we also have some of those, no, where fresh food is readily available. But I would say that food swamps is one of the most common food environments that we have. So in this presentation, I will just touch on 3 topics regarding food environments in Mexico, which is what kind of food is available in the city, considering the outlet present, no, the store close to your house, what type of food that stores has, does it offer fresh food, and whether it is affordable. I think those are 3 indicators that can sum up the availability of the food. The second will be where this food comes from, local production, imports, and the policies that we have for food production. And the third one will be what can we basically do to improve sustainability in terms of public policy, in terms of urban planning, and in terms of social engagement. So this research is kind of on the intersection between city planning and food systems, which is a kind of not very well developed research field, I would say, in this area. So let's just jump into it. The first is the outlet presence. I think one important thing to mention is that many of the outlets that sell fresh food in Mexico are informal markets that pop up on the street once or twice per week. And these informal markets, since they don't have a permanent structure, they are not in the census of economic units, so they're basically not mapped in the as an official outlet that sells fresh food. But they're so common, especially in marginalized and low economic areas. So you can imagine how all the official literature that is based on some statistical analysis or from the census data can be biased because they do not, include this type of outlets. So what we did is we did a lot of field work to compare the presence of these informal markets that in Mexico, they are called tianguis. That is the first column that you can see. The second column are the official food stores, the food commerce. And we compare that with the 15-minute cities, with the accessibility to all other services in the city, like hospitals and educational facilities as well. So we did this mapping of the tianguis by field survey. It was very exhausting. We did it for the 3 biggest cities in Mexico, which is Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey, that you can see here on the screen, but also in 2 medium cities, which is Querétaro and San Luis Potosí. And what we see is that, the 15-minute cities in these large areas is very centralized. 15-minute cities basically in the inner city neighborhoods. There is where you can go and walk and finish your business or buy your food or go to school. Outside in the periphery, that is quite not possible. And even though the food commerce, as we see, have a very large presence in all the urban area, again, the question is what kind of food is available in these official stores that are mapped. And we were very much pleasantly surprised to see that the informal markets also have a really large spatial presence in the city, and especially in the peripheral zones where the more marginalized communities usually are located. However, we should bear in mind that there is a big difference between Mexico City and its peripheral zone. Here on the right side, I'm showing you Atizapan, which is one peripheral municipality in the metro area of Mexico City. And the things are really a contrast from the Mexico City. If there are a lot of presence of stores and tianguis also in the city, peripheral zones are really poorly serviced with outlets. And also the smaller cities that I mentioned, Querétaro and San Luis Potosí, unfortunately, they are also not very high on this index, especially Querétaro, which is following the model of Monterrey, unfortunately, with a large urban sprawl based on the private automobile with almost non-existent public transport. So this kind of cities, unfortunately, the periphery always is very poorly serviced with any type of outlets. So basically, we could say that only Mexico City and Guadalajara fall in this limit of 15-minute accessibility to an outlet store, while the other cities are outside of that range. And especially concerning our Monterrey and Querétaro, they are in another universe where if you don't have a car, basically, I think you cannot live, no? So there was one interesting recent research from Reyes Puente that analyzed the fresh food accessibility in the metropolitan area of Mexico City. And as you can imagine, he compared between 2010 and 2022. And well, on this map, Reyes Puente show these three types of food environments. Oases with the blue color, deserts are with yellow. As you can see, they're all over in the periphery. They're the dominant food environment in the periphery. And the food swamps are starting to appear in the eastern zone, while in 2020, although food oases also grow, especially in the south zone, we will see later why, the food swamps are one food environment that has grown very rapidly. So basically environments where you can only buy or mainly buy processed foods, no? So in terms of what kind of food is present in that outlet, which is my second point, is that, well, those official food stores only sell 6 to 10% of those products are fresh food. So their role in the food environment is very limited, like supermarkets, for example, no? Like 90% of their food is partially or completely processed. So in that way, I'm a big defender of the informal markets, because what I found in the field survey is that especially Guadalajara and Ciudad de Mexico, 50 to 60% of these informal markets are fresh products. But in these large cities, those are mostly resellers that buy food from the wholesale market, and then they bring it to the periphery, to the poor communities, and they resell it. No? So we can say, okay, it's a business for them, but they do kind of a very valuable service for these communities who do not have public transport and do not have any store presence. So it's, I think, a very important resilient point for these communities. And another interesting point is that in Querétaro and San Luis Potosí, even though the fresh food product is a little bit less, 40% of the markets, but many resellers are local producers as well, which I think it's important to link with some policies about local economic development, because income for these families come from their own product that they do on their family farms, and then they sell on these informal markets. So most of them are actually the producers. And Monterrey, unfortunately, I think for now it's a lost case in terms of informal markets. Those informal markets in Monterrey, they're just flea markets that offer other types of products. Fresh food, basically you can only buy in the supermarket. So I am researching all these three indicators. I think they're the most important ones about what food is available, what kind of food is sold, how accessible is that food, and how affordable is that food. In Mexico, we make the mapping of the informal markets. We compare it with the number of people living there and the accessibility. And I developed something that is called a nutritive index for each city, where you can see that these three indicators of availability, accessibility, and affordability are measured and to form the nutritive index. And as I mentioned before, Mexico City, even though a lot of fresh food is available and it is accessible, unfortunately, it is not affordable. It is the most expensive fresh food that you can find. So in that way, it's not really helping poor communities that live in the city. On the other hand, on the periphery of Mexico City, which is Atizapán de Zaragoza, is the most affordable fresh food. So you can imagine that, you know, the periphery sells this cheap fresh food, and in the city that is like 3 times more expensive. In this nutritive index, the best for all three indicators, the best nutritive index is for Guadalajara at this point, and the worst is, as I mentioned, in Monterrey. So I will move to the second point about the local production. Here I have one map that shows basically the local production of fresh food in Mexico City. In the lower part, you can see the administrative boundary of the city, and half of the city is a conservation zone and forest and low grass. So that is a really important point for Mexico City. And many times, you know, local mayor likes to brag that in Mexico City, people have more than 40 square meters per person green area. But it's of course an aggregated measure. So I wonder if this guy here from the north in Mexico City can actually reach this forest with all the traffic in Mexico City and very low maintained public transport. I think it's impossible. So if it is not accessible, it's a little bit, you know, this aggregated measure is not really realistic, but that's another point. What I wanted to say is that this south area of the city is where all the peri-urban and suburban agriculture at this point is performing. And FAO in one report of 2014 measured around 18,000 families involved in this agriculture. And this has been historically, you know, the land of the chinampas, of these gardens of Mexico City. So unlike Australia, we do have a lot of tradition of urban agriculture that is preserved in this zone. Unfortunately, I would say that the lack of transport and lack of public transport is a big problem for the rest of the people to access these zones. And another big problem is, as you can see, the urban area in the north is enormous, and that is outside of the city. So the metro area on the north has 30 million people, and in the Ciudad de Mexico is 9 million people. So, I mean, if you produce food for these 13 million people still depend on you, but there is no production urban agriculture in the metropolitan zone, which I think it's a very crazy situation to be in. But anyway, Ciudad de Mexico, City of Mexico, is very advanced in terms of public policy. So in 2016, they promoted the law of urban gardening, supporting communities in appropriating underused public space to promote urban gardens. And there has been, since that time, around 100 urban gardens in the city, small in scale, but still significant. One of the most interesting are Huerto Romita here in the Municipio Roma, and Huerto Miraville. And so there are a lot of urban gardens because the political frame is there. So there are a lot of movements, very positive and encouraging, happening in the city at this moment. No, maybe it's worth mentioning that, you know, while in the global north, maybe urban agriculture is considered more in this environmental dimensions. Here in Mexico City is also important the economic aspect. Maybe Josh mentioned before that is not so represented in other places, but here, you know, the money that you can get from this food is really an important indicator. No, so basically the problem in Mexico City, I would say, is that the urban expansion is happening very rapidly on the outskirts of the city. This is two photos of the vegetation index from 2015 and 21. So you can see only in 6 years how much urban expansion, especially here on the west side, has happened, because simply the land is not affordable. In the city, it's super expensive. Nobody can buy land. So all the people are buying land on the outskirts. And while inside the city, we have hollowing up. We have a loss of population. In the last 10 years, we have lost more than 10% of the population inside the city. So of course, green lands are opening up, and it's a possibility to make urban gardens. So I like to joke that, you know, the transect idea that was promoted by new urbanism, that is the city is, you know, saved by the woods and swamps surrounding it, in Mexico becomes anti-transect, because we basically have the urbanization on the outside, and inside we have regeneration and returning of nature. So it's something interesting to see how, you know, lack of integrated policy for the metro area is turning the transect into an anti-transect, basically. And the imports
Alexandra,
yes.
Can I ask you a question? How
Yes.
much time do you need to finish?
It's just 5 minutes more.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, I'm going rapidly. Okay. And
Fine.
another thing is that there is a lot of imports. Even though we have this peri-urban agriculture, 80% of the food in Mexico City is imported. We import corn from United States and we sell them berries, which is a little bit crazy in terms of, which environment is producing what. And most of the food, of course, it's in these large globalized chains. Although the president has pledged, to promote urban agriculture and to promote self-sufficient in agricultural products, it's less to be seen, no? And finally, yes, I'm finishing. I think that without having an integral policies, for the whole metro area, doing good things in the city is not enough, because you have, 13 million population depending on the city. So just focusing on the city, I don't think it will bring a big benefit unless you consider this transversal thinking for the environment. And research by design, we have several, with the students, we are finding out on the periphery, which has more land reserve basically. In the periphery, these underutilized zones, and there are municipal property, and we are proposing, urban gardens, considering all the factors of water, because it's an arid and warm region, how to collect the rainwater and how to engage the people. So the strategies basically are to manage the ecosystem, but also to provide a quality public space for communities, because these are marginalized communities. So these projects have to consider that the land can be contaminated, because on the peri-urban zones, it's a lot of industry, so these lands can be close to contaminants. So you cannot just go and say, oh, I'm going to plant my tomato. First, you have to spend years with phytoremediation of the soil. So that's why we first propose some kind of structures with terraces that can serve also with public space, that can also collect rainwater. They all have the system of recollection and of rainwater in the basement, and also they have a system for treatment of water, and to see how the urban infrastructure can be saved, because there are still remnants of this urban infrastructure in the peripheral zone, and used to promote active mobility in the zone, because there is nothing, there is not even an A of active mobility in the periphery. So if you cannot reach the zone, you are not likely to engage, in this type of activities. And the people is very important. We try to use social platforms to connect with the people and ask them what they want. And we found interesting things. For example, my students say, oh, we will give them free Wi-Fi. Nobody cares about free Wi-Fi. They say, we want security, we want lighting. So it's very important to get in touch and get real with the people. They want playgrounds for children, because while people farm and they are in the huerto, where are they going to leave the children? These are people who have 5, 6 children in one family. So it's very important to include, this with the ecosystem, also the zones for recreation and the zones for social interaction. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you, Alexander. It's great. And sorry to interrupt you halfway, but we've got a couple of more very interesting speakers coming up. I was very interested in your story about that large parts of the, let's say, urban agriculture system are not mapped, and therefore they don't exist. And I think that is one of the things that we need to take into account. And the other thing, the anti-transect that you mentioned is very interesting, because that opens up, even if we don't map it, it opens up the spaces for new green spaces and food production in the city. So thanks a lot. To everyone who is watching at the moment, please, if you have any questions, put that in the Q&A chat, so we can direct any questions to the speakers later on. Thank you so much, Alexander, for your wonderful research. Our next speaker is Greg Keefe. He is originally from the UK, working in Belfast, but at the moment he is in New York for work at Cornell University. Greg is a professor of sustainable architecture, looking into climate adaptation, regenerative cities, and also food systems. We have worked quite a bit together, and I'm sure that you will like his presentation as well. So Greg, take it away from here. Thank you for being
Rob.
here.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you see the slides?
Also.
That's good. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, Rob. I'm really glad to be able to talk at the event. This is about my journey in food, really, from when I started to where I'm up to now. I suppose, if I can click on. I think this was the first time I decided to get into food. This is a report for the ecological footprinting of London that was done in 2005. And it showed the size of the ecological footprint of London, and it was huge, 293 times larger than London, and 41% of it was food. Most of my work at that time had been in the energy world, so I suddenly saw this food thing and thought, I can shrink that. And so that's how I really got into it. And the first project I did was with Marks and Spencer's on strawberry yogurt, you know, which I found out the energy in the yogurt was only 113 calories. It was low fat, especially unappetizing. It's because people have too many calories, so they want less calories, but it needed 440 times that amount of energy to produce it and store it and refrigerate it and manufacture the pot. So that was absolutely crazy. So we got them to localize their milk production a bit. The other one was this herb bundle that was produced all over Europe and wrapped in recycled cardboard, which we got them to turn into a fresh herb hydroponic system in their stores. So really changing the amount of transport involved in that. And then I started to think about how we might live. This was a project they called the Invisible Terrace, which looked at making a self-sufficient house, self-sufficient from energy, food and car travel in one place. And it has 3 pigs, 11 chickens, an algae array and some food production, and just about does it. And this is where I got the idea for this hardware, software interface thing. You know, I realized there's technological systems in these modern food systems. There's also the choice of what you grow, which is the software. And then there's how it engages with people. Obviously, this engages in a lifestyle of someone being a smallholder, which is very different from our lives at the moment. And then from that project, I ended up designing the Biospheric Foundation. We had this idea of doing some guerrilla action in the city. We took a food desert, which was only less than a kilometre from the city centre of Manchester, and tried to turn it into a food oasis. And we developed this idea of this aquaponic laboratory and farm, which got funded by Manchester International Festival. I'm quite interested in aquaponics, this mixture of aquaculture and hydroponics. I like the idea that you get 2 crops out of one set of food, and I like the way that it could be a miniature ecology, and I was really interested in that. So, and what I realized from doing it, I built the whole system out of things I found on eBay and secondhand things. And so I realized that the technology of these things isn't very complicated. We ran the project for a year. I made it really biodiverse. So instead of being a monoculture, it had 34 different plants, 4 different species of fish, some different crustaceans and some mollusks in it. I was trying to make an ecology out of it. There's some touch. Here's the project on top of an old derelict factory. I got some massive pumps to pump the water around up and down. I got some secondhand photovoltaics that I found in a dumpster in a skip lying around that someone didn't want to power it. And this is the mineralization system made out of washing up bowls with little sort of siphons in there, coated. You can see it on the roof here. Then the water was poured out of the fish through the mineralization over to the window, went through these window systems where we grew fruiting plants such as peppers and strawberries and things on the south side of it. And then from there it then squirted onto the roof and grew 30 different salad crops in a nutrient film system made out of secondhand rainwater guttering. And the plants grew really fast, amazingly fast. The nutrients were there. It was sunny, for the year. So we ran the project for a year. What we did, we had 2 restaurants that we engaged with, where we sold the leaf crops to them every day, told them by bike. And then with the leaf crops that weren't perfect, we gave them away free in a pop-up Whole Foods store that we opened at the base of the building called 78 Steps. That was the food miles from the farm to the shop. And if you bought a recipe off a recipe card, you get free salad with the meal, and sometimes fish if you were lucky. And the project ran for a year before the building was demolished. I got really interested in the idea that we could miniaturize the system in some way. So I developed this food producing facade. This is the mock-up of it. This is the first go at it inside the building. We put it in the facade of the building later on and used it. And that was really effective at cooling buildings, but also in being productive. And then I produced this idea of the super duper market, which was a food producing supermarket. Because one of the things I was worried about was how much food you had to feed the fish. And I realized that if the waste food in a supermarket didn't leave the supermarket, it wasn't classed as waste in the UK. So it could be fed straight to fish and those fish could be eaten. So I developed this sort of vertical system that produced fish and salad crops, which are the worst of all the things that are stored in the supermarket in terms of waste. Most British salad crops are grown in Spain. Most of them are 3 weeks old when they arrive in the country and pretty rotten, and we can grow them directly in the supermarket. And I think we can make easily £1 million per supermarket in just wholesale price of leaf crops without even the fish being included in that. And that got me interested in the supermarket, more about the interface. I realized that when you start to think about the supermarket as being just an outlet, if you sort of see it as an inlet as well, you can get a circular system going on of waste being recycled and reused and packaging being recycled and reused. And Emma Campbell, who's a research fellow at Queen's, did her PhD on the circularity of the supermarket. That's really worth reading if you're interested in that sort of thing. And that leads me to the project I did with Rob, which is the Movable Nexus project. This was looking at urban food production in the city and urban energy production. Belfast, where I work, is a sort of post-industrial hellhole, really. As you can see, this is typical street layout, not a single piece of greenery in the streets. These are Victorian industrial housing, and it wasn't considered correct to give people any green space at all. So, but if you look at the amount of food those people need, we can turn that into an area of land that's needed, but also a carbon footprint, which is an area of forest needed to allay that carbon. And so what we did, we started to look at all the different possible elements that we could use to grow food in that neighborhood, from infill greenhouses to windowsill systems to back garden things on the roof, things in the street. And we started to see how much food we could produce by making it all local in those neighborhoods. These are some of the ideas. And that meant that we had to think a lot again about circularity, that a lot of these food systems need compost or need nutrient flows or other sorts of protein sources to grow the fish and things. And so we created really complex systems of circularity in the neighborhood that could really bring things together and make them work in terms of food, energy, and water. And that gives us a final scheme for the neighborhood that could completely feed everyone who lives there at the moment in that tiny space. So I think when we look at urban agriculture, I think we often think that it's not efficient, but actually it can be really effective. These people are really poor. They have atrocious diets. They generally don't even know their next door neighbor. The externalities that can be produced from urban food production are fantastic. People can work together. They can share things. They can have a part-time job in the farm. They can have evening jobs in the farm. They can get to know everybody. They can eat better. It's an absolute win-win-win-win-win situation. Here's a section through the project which combines food, energy, and water in the neighborhood. So to finish off, I suppose what I've learned is that food's cultural and it's a system, and we have to understand it as those sort of things. It's really easy to Photoshop green stuff on buildings. You know, it's harder to make things, but the technologies are relatively simple. So we don't really have to worry so much about the hardware. it's really the interface bit that's becoming most interesting, and the software too. In the Biospheric Foundation, we grew a lot of edible flowers because they were very expensive and we could make a lot of money out of them, which is something that we hadn't thought of at first. So I think generally, I think we look for these positive externalities to really make things happen. And I think the other amazing thing is it makes you work with incredibly nice people. Food is one of the places where really nice people are involved, and so here's a list of some of the people I've worked with on these projects, and they've been fantastic people as well as the stakeholders. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Greg. It's amazing to see all those projects. Some of them I already knew, but not all of them. And you keep on thinking anyway in those kind of directions. One of your conclusions that you, through food, you start working with nice people. That's I think that's one of the biggest things and a great conclusion about it, because when you do, then you'll have amazing projects, and maybe in some other academic disciplines that is less so. I don't know, but I can agree with you that in the food science it's true. I have one small question for you, because if you have been able to turn a food desert into a food oasis in the Biospheric project, but could you actually do the same thing if you talk about a food swamp, like Alexandra was mentioning in her presentation, and turn that in a food oasis, because that would shift, unhealthy foods.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing about the super duper market, that actually the idea of producing fresh vegetables and fish on the facade of the shop could be an amazing game changer, couldn't it, for these swamps where there's actually something good to eat and produce, so that's my dream, that the super duper market will take off and sort of take over the world.
Well, that's a great idea. So we need to talk to the OXXO supermarket in Mexico, and ask them how they want to change. Thanks a lot, Greg, and I'm sure that will be raise a lot of discussion and questions. Anna, I think to introduce you, we are colleagues in the Faculty of Excellence in Technology de Monterrey. We met half a year ago, and we will start talking about the heritage of the food system and how that could work. Anna is an art historian, and some people might say and think art historians, they're really boring people. But it's the opposite is true, because Anna is a very exciting person to work with and to be with. We started discussing, thinking about a different type of approach for the food system based on the heritage of the food system. And I'm sure you will talk a little bit more about that, Anna. Very welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for the invitation. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm going to be super brief, as we already have so much more information for one of these seminars. So I don't know why my hand is raised. So this is a project that I started working with Professor Robert Gemma. Recently, I'm going to say this is a scoop, because we very recently started working on this project. So what you see is kind of what we aim to achieve. Hopefully we'll do it. It'll take us a few years, but I think it's an interesting approach, also because it's interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. So I want to tell you that, and probably Mexican food is really well known all over the world. We have now a big boom on new gastronomy, but also we have a strong and big heritage. A couple of years ago, Mexican food was named World Immaterial Heritage by UNESCO, following the path of they call it the Michoacan expedient, the Michoacan file, following the path of the food, of the gastronomy, of the heritage of food in Michoacan. a group of experts were able to build a file that it was brought to UNESCO, and UNESCO decided to declare Mexican food as an immaterial world heritage. So we're on the spot. Now we're part of this huge discourse. Just yesterday, we have this big 50 best restaurants in the world, and we have 3 Mexicans in the best 50 places, and 3 other Mexicans in the other 50. So in the best 100 restaurants of the world, we have around 6 Mexicans, and 1 Mexican chef that it's working in London, also with Mexican techniques and ingredients. So it's really interesting to understand that contemporary chefs and cooks are understanding the heritage of food and the importance of traditional recipes, traditional learning, and also traditional ingredients. So the project, and we call it a regional heritage food, a food project for the Noreste. As you know, Professor Ogema is now based in Monterrey. I'm based in Mexico City, but we started to discuss a project for Monterrey, working with different disciplines and different colleagues at Tec de Monterrey, and also understanding that Tec is building this huge project called Distrito Tec, and is working with a very interesting community that it's called La Campana, very close by to our campus in Monterrey. So we started putting together this project that you'll see. It's in paper. We already started working on different approaches, and we started locating agents and developing themes. So the purpose of this project is to develop a regional food system that meets the following end. It is locally, regionally grown. It is based on traditional heritage ingredient dishes, and it meets global regenerative goals to stay within the planetary boundaries. So everything that our colleagues here talked about food that it's not available, processed food that had really flawed the Mexican landscape of food. We're trying to revert this and really create a local system, thinking of the local resources we have. We will investigate traditional dishes, menus of the Noreste, and I'll talk about the Noreste in a while, in close cooperation with local chefs and other agents. We will determine the typical Mexican diet and fit this with the Lancet Planetary Health Diet. We will plan and design the required ingredients, crops in the regional landscape. This emphasizes the interrelation of a healthy diet, both for people and the planet, innovative local dishes based on the regional traditions, and the growth of crops and ingredients in the regional landscape. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Noreste. The Noreste is that region. We used to have this very important intellectual that was our Minister of Education, and he used to say that the Noreste was that place where museums were invisible, and carne asada, how would I say carne asada, Rob? You know by now.
Yeah, I think it's a meat barbecue, something.
A meat barbecue starts. So there was this idea that there was no culture in the Noreste, only barbecue. A huge desert and the barbecue. But also we have discovered that in the late, with all this Mexican gastronomy boom and high-end restaurants, that there's a big Noreste tradition with ingredients very different from the ones in the center of Mexico City, also very different from the ones in the north, but it has not been very well documented or very well studied. So now there's a group of Mexican chefs and specialists and historians dealing with the idea of the heritage of Noreste food. Where that Noreste ingredients come from, how have they developed all these recipes and all this mixture of a Jewish culture, an Arabic culture and Spanish culture, all these mixtures of cultures that today, they create Mexico. So this is our first roadmap. We've been locating agents, first in terms of agents, making a database of agents, interviewing them, and that's as far as we go. We are also trying to find sponsors for the projects. That's a very important thing. And then regarding recipes, ingredients, and urban farming, we realized that in Monterrey, and especially the Noreste, the urban farming movement is not yet very well established, as is in other parts of the country. So the interviews we are doing with agents, we are getting the recipes, analyzing the recipes and understanding what the ingredients are. We want to create a seed bank for those important ingredients of the Noreste food. And then our urban farming capacitation and development, public and private, and create a public and private urban farming. Then grow the ingredients for the Noreste food and create a sorts place that also could help the chefs and local cooks and traditional local cooks to get, So here we have it a bit more developed. Those agents we realized were chefs in Monterrey and the Noreste area. The database of agents, we are starting to create it. But those local agents are not only the chefs, but also people living in La Campana and women in La Campana that have cooked forever and have received kind of the heritage of these recipes from family, grandmothers, mothers, aunts. We have already started interviewing agents. Of course, we want to reach sponsors. We have a couple of ideas, get the recipes. We found out that the Ministry of Culture have done like a really good research on Noreste recipes a few years ago, more than 10 years ago, that had not been actualized, but we are working with that. And for example, with Sonia Santos, a very important agent in Monterrey that has been researching recipes of Noreste food and she's even organizing a contest since 6 years ago about the best Noreste food recipe, Noreste food recipe. When we are going to try, we started already collecting the recipes with this research that the Minister of Culture had done a long time ago, and that was published in a very interesting series of books regarding food and heritage. Then we want to create the seed bank, especially we're thinking of La Campana. We are already working with agents in La Campana and interviewing people from La Campana. And the urban farming capacitation and development is really interesting. We have found out that the Chapingo University, that it's a public university that had dealt with what happens in the countryside, what happens with agriculture, with a long tradition of agriculture. They had created a national network of what they call backyard orchards. So these backyard gardens in which people can plant their food and cultivate them themselves. So they have a national network of these huertos de traspatio, and they have people in charge of different areas of the country, and they try to develop other communities to help them to create these backyards, these nutritious backyards. So we have already located the person that is in charge of the Noreste region, and we're already talking to him. The public and private urban farming, we're thinking, of course, of schools, private houses. Even the small house could have a private orchard. Then we would very much like to grow the ingredients for all these recipes, for all and heritage recipes that we have, put together, grow ingredients for the Noreste food, and also for public or private consumption. This could be stage 1 and then stage 2. First for private consumption, the people that plant their own orchards, they will feed off that. But then we could create, if there's a surplus, we could start selling that for different agents. And those agents could be the chefs that sometimes they have told us that they could, that they could not find all of the ingredients in the area. And then the link with La Campana, that it's very important. We have already located a series of agents that have already been working with La Campana. They already have located agents and important people that could help us know about La Campana, know about the heritage, the idea of the community, and the interest of the inhabitants of La Campana. And then a very important thing, and that's kind of my take, I think art is very important to put the discussion on the table. I think that is what art is for, and then design can solve those problems that art brings to the table. So we are bringing the art component to this project with Laboratorio de Arte AC, that it's a laboratory and a residency program in Monterrey. We have already started working. We made connections with the Delfina Foundation in London, and we are trying to create a link between the Delfina Foundation and Laboratorio de Arte AC and create this residency for collectives and artists that had been working with food with different tastes. And finally, we would like to connect with Cube in Belfast to try and create a bigger link and try and prove what we are trying to achieve here. So this is a scoop because we just recently started working on this. As you see, we have big hopes. We have a big schedule to go ahead, but I think we have many components that could be working at the same time, and we could reach different conclusions in different fields. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Sounds like a great project to me, actually. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I think that's very interesting, apart from the artists' involvement, is also the link to the restaurants and the chefs. I mean, producing and make food available for people that is more healthy, that's one thing, but the other thing is that doing that through the chefs that we know, that it becomes something that is really like a culture instead of just a plain producing system. I think that links also back into the interface that Greg was mentioning. That if we have that kind of interface, and also of course the artists do the same thing, and it's very important. So I think that's great.
A very important thing that I think I didn't mention is that these chefs that we have identified, they're all working with the idea of the tradition of the Noreste food. They have done very in-depth research about ingredients, about recipes, about the history of the recipes. So those are agents that have already done most of the work, and their research it goes really deep, and they know what they're doing, and they've been doing it for a long time. At least we have around 5 chefs, high-end chefs, but they also work with community and with urban farming in developing and growing their own ingredients. So I think that's something to be taken into account. That heritage has already been explored.
Yeah, I think, and it's very important. I think maybe, Greg or Alexander, do you want to comment on each other and on Anna's presentation as well? That would be interesting.
I know, I really like the idea of the chef as the artist. I think that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? And I was thinking of Simon Rogan, who's an English chef. He has his own farm next to his restaurant, and he grows loads of previously foraged items on his own farm. And there may be some really interesting models for how that might work, you know, in Mexico, I think. So that might be something to think about. And he's got 3 Michelin stars at the moment, so he's doing quite well.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, the so much wisdom is going lost, no? Anna, Mexico cuisine, no, is famous all over the world, and the way that the proteins are mixed with other ingredients, it's just going to waste by all these, you know, processed foods that invaded the country. And I think it's a great resource that we need to conserve and save, and I think it's an excellent project.
Yeah, so I think there may be huge collaborations that can emerge from this. I think the categories of knowledge that are integrated or need to be integrated in not only this project that Anna presented, but also maybe also feeding back into the more regular projects that everyone is doing. Maybe missing out on cultural or designerly or artist involvement in this, and I think that could be a very, you know, a mutual beneficial system.
Yes, and I think we should not forget the educational side of it, no? I think it's very strong to people get re-educated in some way, no? Of how to grow food, how to produce it, how to consume it, no? I think it's very important to include younger generation and also education for the all people, no?
Yeah, I think it was amazing when we did the Biospheric Foundation, because the festival was only open for 2 weeks, and we had roughly 14,000 visitors in the first 2 weeks. But the festival had requests from nearly 100,000 people to see it, and so we had to keep it open. We had to open it every Saturday with 400 extra visitors for the whole year, because people were so excited by the idea of local food production, about aquaponics, about, you know, some people about the technology, some people about the ecology, some people about the social things. It's obviously food really matters to people, so, you know, and that educational thing is really important.
Yeah, and educational, but also to have it as part of a festival, art festival. I mean, that proves the point. I mean, it's not about a farm as such, but it's much broader than that.
Yeah, well, the chair of the festival said to me, I asked him why he wanted a farm in his festival, and he said, well, the thing is, what he's realized is people who like art eat well, and people who don't like art eat bad food. So he says there's obviously a link between the two. So he wanted to sort of educate them, you know. So it's quite interesting.
We can conclude that working with food is good. It relates us to the arts, but also you meet a lot of nice people. So that I think the overall conclusion. But we have not finished the webinar yet. There's a couple of interesting questions coming from the audience, and the first one is about sort of a seasonal perspective, because in some seasons it's very easy to produce food, but while in other seasons it's very difficult, and that requires import, export, and the whole thing that actually frustrates the local regional agricultural system. So how do you have any ideas how we can solve this kind of, you know, problems?
Can I answer that one? Yeah, because that's one of the reasons I did the super duper market after the Biospheric, because in the Biospheric I shut it down in December and reopened it again in March, because January and February were just too cold and the light levels weren't there. So David, you're right there, but the thing about the supermarket, it has loads of waste heat, and it generally has a cogeneration plant that has loads of spare electricity, particularly at night. So that's one of the reasons why I really like the idea of the super duper market, because it can tap into those waste streams of heat and power to light and warm the farm. So I think that's one of the ways out of it, I think.
Yeah, so that's true for the UK, North UK. But now getting back to Monterey in 44 degrees and it's dry. So we have a different problem there.
Yeah.
Can we solve that as well?
Well, I think you can, because you could use, say, absorption chillers, couldn't you, which use solar energy to cool air. I mean, it'd be interesting what shape of greenhouse you could use to move air around in a different sort of way. Obviously, you need shade. You've got good light. You've got 4 times as much light as we have in the UK on a typical day. So you don't need 100% glazed thing. So, you know, there's interesting things, but obviously every climate has its issues. You know.
Yeah. So maybe one other question we go. It's more about, is something like a regional heritage landscape produce this kind of foods at a large scale? Has that been done in Latin America or around the globe somewhere that we know of?
Well, I'm aware of a very interesting project that was developed in the Yucatan area a couple of years ago that are called actually Traspatio. And it was born with a foundation and a chef, an international chef, the big chef, which name I'm forgetting. No, René Redzepi. He was the #1 chef in the world for a Noma restaurant in Denmark. So before pandemic, he decided to come to Tulum and put a restaurant up for a couple of months. So before that, to do that, he worked like for a couple of years in developing the scene and working with different agents and foundations in the area, doing research about local ingredients, local heritage. So with this foundation, Haciendas del Mundo Maya, they started to create a thing called Huertos de Traspatio Maya, in different local, very small towns with indigenous communities, local communities. They started to grow these backyard orchards to develop Mayan original ingredients, so that they could nourish themselves, grow their own ingredients, but also the surplus could go to this Noma restaurant that was installed in Tulum for like 2.5 months. And it was the most expensive restaurant of the world. I think each menu cost like $800. And people from all over the world in private jets came to Tulum during that summer. But it was really interesting that it was not only a project of coming and colonizing, but before, like years before that, they kind of developed the whole scene. And these huertos, this Traspatio Maya, actually keeps on working. And what they do is, with the foundation, the Haciendas del Mundo Maya, the surplus, the restaurant is not there, but the surplus they started selling to other restaurants. They do these weekly baskets that they sell to individual people. So it was a very interesting, it was a small, I wouldn't say it's like very big, a small experiment that was detonated by this, this big restaurant. But now it kind of keeps feeding the peninsula in a way.
Yeah, great example that people from the best restaurants in Scandinavia come to Mexico for not only to stay there but also to get inspired. I mean, that's very interesting. Alexandra, do you want to add?
No, it's great. Just a comment that yes, I know about the chef René Redzepi. Actually, he's from my part of the world. I think Albania or Macedonia, but he had his restaurant over there in Europe. I'm very happy to hear. I didn't know about this project. Yes. Thank you, Anna. I will research it, and I think it's a great example. No, it's a great example. And like somebody in the comments also said about inefficient government, we don't have policies, and there is a lot of that going on. But I think that we as citizens, if we spread our own commitment, to producing the food, then the pressure to government will come. And of course, government are public servants, so they would have to, improve this kind of policies. So I think it's very important to promote this project, to support this project, and to form a citizen network that can later, put pressure on the government, and so this can enter into public policy officially, and be a mainstream. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. It's very unfortunate. We are nearing the end of the webinar, and my feeling is that we have a lot to talk about. We could go on for 1.5 hours more, but unfortunately, we cannot do that. I think many of the watchers and listeners, they have to do and go to different places. We had an amazing conversation, amazing dialogue together. With all of you, including Josh from Australia. I hope he is sound asleep at the moment. Thank you so much for your presentations and your insights in this subject, which is really, really important. One of my main conclusions keeps on coming back into my head, that if we want to turn food swamps and food deserts into oases, then we need to involve a whole lot of other people who are seemingly also the most nice people in the world. So I think that is for everyone very attractive to join this kind of thinking and working. If anyone who's listening wants to join us in a project, please feel free to contact us and join. That brings me to an end, and the only thing that I need to talk to you about is the next Urban Dialogue, which will be in August, 30th of August. And during that dialogue, we will talk about the heat and drought in the city, and how we can prepare and design our city for that climate impact. Today is a hot day, but solutions are there to come. And I will invite you to join the next Urban Dialogue in August. Have a very nice summer, stay cool, and have a good time.